the Super Unknown. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
And this week we will be discussing Soundgarden and their 1994 album Super Unknown. I know this one is really special to Cory, so it's been a long time coming.
Long time coming. Doing some Soundgarden. I know I've dropped snippets of my Soundgarden love throughout. If you've been listening to us for a while, there's many anecdotes. I'll try to not repeat the ones I've done before, but yeah, I was a huge Soundgarden head. 7th grade is when I found them. It was inside of this grunge era, so they spoke to me because they had this outside the grunge sound. Like, they were considered back then, in my opinion, they were considered inside of the grunge sound with Pearl Jam and Nirvana and just the whole grouping. But they always stood above most of it. I won't even say that. A lot came from Cornell's voice for me, but I will say most of it came from Kim Thayil's playing. Like, there's so many just wild musical ideas, especially on this album, because when I found this album, I was maybe listening to a track or two off of the album prior, but I thought the album before this was their first album. I might even said that last week. I might have said their second album because I forgot they had the crazy ones back in the day.
Yeah, on Sub Pop.
Yeah, like super obscure Soundgarden. So maybe I was late to the game, but gosh, I loved them. I wore a green Soundgarden tricycle shirt for the majority of my 8th grade year, which was 94, 95.
That's the era.
Yeah.
That's this era. You were on trend.
The old pea green shirt. I love that shirt so much. But yeah, I'm excited to be doing Soundgarden. There's a lot of cool stuff to explore here, I feel like.
Yes, there is. And yeah, this was kind of, I think you discovered them, it sounds like, at the same time as many people there. This was the true breakthrough point for them, and the stars aligned for them to break through in 1994. It was perfect timing for this band. There was a road to get there, of course.
Yeah.
Didn't happen all overnight. So yes, this is their 4th studio album, actually. And their mainstream breakthrough album was Bad Motor Finger previously, and that put their name out there. They weren't an indie band anymore, but they were in the major leagues now, and they were just ready to keep going. They made their footing in, but they were ready to continue going. And unlike other grunge bands, they were not out about saying, we are not interested in success and fame or any of that. We don't care. They were not that band. They did care. They wanted to get their music out to the world. And I'm glad they were upfront about that, actually, because if you're playing, of course you want to get your music out there to the world. If you just wanted to write and not play, you wouldn't bother releasing it.
Yeah, but and in that era too, it was such a fresh, happy thought to see them being musicians, and being musicians that had their eye on the prize rather than these icons that we saw that acted like they didn't care about it and that they hated it and things like that. It was cool to see. They were always a breath of fresh air. Even though they might not have looked like a breath of fresh air, they were darker in tone in their appearance. You could always feel that musicianship. I'm going to be talking about them a bunch, but I feel a lot of that comes from Kim Thayil as well, because one, for me, he didn't look like your normal run-of-the-mill guitarist. He was a big Indian dude with a beard. Like, he was a big boy. And the stuff that was coming out of him was mind-blowing. They were always there, man. They really were.
Yes. And early on, they got to upgrade their sound. They really knew they wanted to go to the next level. And fortunately, there was a new studio in Seattle for them to do it, where they could play all day and just go home. And this was called Bad Animals Studio. It was owned by Ann and Nancy Wilson of the band Heart. It was named after their 1987 album, which featured their huge hit Alone. And it was a hot spot for the grunge musicians because Heart got their start in Seattle, and it was important to the Wilson sisters to give back to their community, especially as it was coming up in this new golden age, even if Heart was definitely not a grunge band, but they wanted to be a part of it and be on the pulse and give back. And they upgraded this old studio and made it state of the art for bands to use. And Soundgarden couldn't pass up the opportunity to use this studio. And they actually planned on working with Rick Rubin for this album because they wanted to go to the next level. But they instead met with Matt Beinhorn, who had worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the 80s. They're another turntables and tea favorite, the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, man.
And they weren't sure at first, but they did a test run with him and they recorded a couple songs that didn't end up on this album. But they knew this is the right guy. And he pushed them to be the best that they could be, to the point where he frustrated them. But in a great contrast from the last couple of weeks on this show, we have a producer pushing the artist. Jack Antonoff needs to take a note on that. But enough about that. But it wasn't all bad. There were good times. There were celebrities popping in and out, other musicians from the scene, including Billy Corgan, who wasn't really welcome because he's Billy Corgan and likes to start shit. But
yeah, I'm speaking of that scene. That musicality is another reason they needed to step up, because you're coming out of, at this point, this Seattle super sound. You know, you're coming out of these. A lot of the grunge scene was coming out of Seattle. So yeah, to rise above that, you really got to show. I'm glad, and this is so crazy to say out loud because I love the man, but I'm glad they didn't go Rubin here. Could we have got something crazy? Of course, it's Rubin, but I'm glad we got exactly what we got here, because they need that push to get above at this point, in my opinion. I mean, you look at Bad Motorfinger, and I might get crucified for this, but like the only song that really is stuck around maybe is like Rusty Cage. It's like not many people even know Bad Motorfinger is there, unless you get into some Soundgarden. So they needed that push to get to the next level, and I'm glad they got it through him.
Yes, and they recorded it all through the summer of 1993, and when it came time to mix the album, this was another very key point in making it sound the best that it could, because this wasn't the most traditional band. They had their own way of doing things. They needed somebody to make their stuff sound good, and they turned to none other than Brendan O'Brien, who had just recently produced Pearl Jam's Verses, and he has a huge resume.
Oh, yeah.
All around. So a real great mixer to choose. Honestly, a legend just based on his resume. All the stuff he's worked on, it's insane. Like Chili Peppers as well is on there. And countless stuff. Too much to name here.
Yeah, and coming off Verses, we're going to touch on Soundgarden sound, but coming off Verses, you need somebody that can mix these wild, heavy sounds, but in a way that really focuses them to the right area. You're getting a lot of this crazy reverb, heavy tones, and you've got to be able to fit that in without it being an over encumbering part of the composition. And on Verses he showed that, so it feels like an easy decision here on that one.
Yes, and unlike other grunge stars, Chris Cornell was ecstatic with the job that Brendan O'Brien did.
Hell yeah,
he loved it. And yeah, looking into Chris Cornell this week, I really did enjoy researching him much more than I did Kurt Cobain. I'm going to say that right now, because he seemed much more magnanimous and gracious to those around him, and he really wasn't the complete dark guy he presented at times in his lyrics. He could be a good time. He dressed up for Halloween as a black hole sun this year at Ann Wilson's house. Like he had a good sense of humor, was a good time, and that what makes me sadder that he's no longer with us, unfortunately. But he did leave behind a huge legacy.
He did indeed, even past Soundgarden. They always came over like that to me, though. And I know I said a little bit before, but even a modesty with them when they were being interviewed, rather than rather than if it was on MTV or in Rolling Stones, whether you could see them on film or not, you always got this humble, modest take from them, or I did at least.
Yeah, and the public was ready for it. The album's lead single came in February, big success. Album was released in March of 1994, debuted at #1, over 310,000 copies sold first week, which was huge for this band. They hadn't come close to topping the charts before, and this was at the time where Nirvana was about to end forever. Not everybody knew that quite yet, but it was coming very soon. And Pearl Jam was doing everything they could to distance themselves from the mainstream. It was Soundgarden's moment to become the band.
I remember being so heavy into Soundgarden, and that I'll touch on it a little later in this album, but that sadness of Cobain dying was lessened in my experience because of the love I had for them. I've said this in extent on our Nirvana podcast, but there was this, not so much a filling of the hole, but the hole was way less because I had sounds like this coming in. And for me, that spoke to, and again, I have this later on in my notes, but that spoke to this happier mentality inside of the grunge era, because even for me, it was getting a little played out at that point that we were all sad all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, this, not that this isn't heavy,
Yeah.
but it was a bit more upbeat than what other folks were putting out. So did you buy this album first week when it came out?
I don't know about first week. I know I had it on cassette before I had it on CD. I definitely remember that. I know that it wasn't long between. I alluded to this in our outro last week, but I know that I had the CD by the time it was like middle of 8th grade, because I handed in one of these songs as a poem. And this is before the days of the internet, so the plagiarism, I was pretty confident that, and my last minute attempt to turn this assignment in, that I wasn't going to be caught plagiarizing, because not many of my teachers, I think, even knew who Soundgarden was. And we'll get more into that later. So yeah. I definitely didn't buy CD first week. I don't know if I bought the cassette first week. I don't think I did. But it's been in my collection ever since.
I'm pretty sure, I think I know what song it was. I have a guess. I'm curious to see what it will be.
I heard
that.
That.
Actually, I was reading I'm in the middle of it still, a biography of Chris Cornell called Total Fucking Godhead. And it's quite well done, but in it said Soundgarden was so big in 1994 that Judge Lance Ito, who was presiding over the O.J. Simpson murder trial, during an interview, when asked what kind of music do you like, he told the interviewer, I really like Soundgarden. So this band was so big, they found their way into the O.J. Simpson murder trial. That's impact right there.
That musicality sings. They have a different take. We'll touch on it, but I mean, they have a heavy take mixed with, in my opinion, almost like a psychedelic take, and that was a sound that we didn't get much back then. So it was a neat thing for the ears to hear some of the musicality on this album.
I mean, Cornell was a Beatles head.
True that.
He was a Beatles head. Yeah. And the album has endured. It's gone 6 times platinum in the US and triple platinum in Australia and Canada. And it's pretty well regarded as a grunge era classic at this point. It's this band's biggest album, certainly, and it's their towering achievement in the eyes of most.
I would say so.
So, and of course, it was also critically acclaimed. Rave reviews immediately from New York Times and Rolling Stone, and some it was nominated for Best Rock Album at the Grammys, and this is crazy in hindsight, but also makes complete sense. They lost to Voodoo Lounge by the Rolling Stones, which I think that was a case of the committee was voting for the band and not the album. Because
yeah, that was tough.
that
But you got, if you're in the Grammys and the Stones are up for Best Rock Album of the Year, it's going to Stones.
yeah, and it was a new category in the 90s. Like, if it had been around in 1972, of course the Stones would have won. It was in some ways a legacy award, which, I mean, come on, it's the Stones. But in hindsight, it's pretty wild. It's like another band's magnum opus lost out to middling late period Stones.
It crushed Voodoo Lounge. Hot tea take. It crushed Voodoo Lounge. I mean, they're just on two totally different wavelengths, but sorry, Mick. Musically, I feel like Super Unknown took you guys out on that one.
I think most people think that, but it's not like the Stones hadn't had their time in the sun.
Heard.
But now it was time for the Black Hole Sun in 1994. And with that being said, I'm ready to go track by track. We've got a lot to discuss, 15 songs.
Let's get at it.
Before we get started, please follow us on social media. Links are in the description, and also subscribe and rate us wherever you're listening to us. It would be much appreciated. The album begins with Let Me Drown. This was described by Chris Cornell as a song about crawling back to the womb to die. Heavy opener, both lyrically and musically. It rocks hard, and I think it's a great grunge album opener. This is what I want to hear for this kind of album. And it's got Cornell's signature screams. He's got a lot of them. He blew through 5 microphones while recording this album. So he was a perfectionist with the vocals. And that professionalism comes through on a song like this. It's all really, you can tell the right takes were being used. And he really does balance out the screaming vocals along with smooth sounds very well. So I think this is a strong opener.
Yeah, he really does. They really do, period. They round it out with that bridge at 212. It relaxes, even though the bass and the drums are still pounding. There's a relaxing tone there, and a well-rounding tone inside of this crazy heavy. I mean, heavy from the first note of every instrument, and some super heavy lyrics coming out of Cornell. It's a really wild, kinetic opener, and I like that. In hindsight, I'll do both takes. Back then, I liked it because it was powerful and it was a great sound, and I wanted to play it all. But in hindsight, in a critical stance, it really is a look back at a Motorfinger sound, that heaviness and that raw indiness of the Soundgarden, and really marries it with the sound that we're going to hear throughout this album.
Yes, and that sound is going to continue with the second track, which is My Wave, written with Kim Thayil. This has been noted as a prime example of the band's use of unusual time signatures, which Kim Thayil actually said was an accident. The signatures weren't figured out until the song was actually written. And you don't have to be a musician or expert to hear that some of these songs are different sounding, and it does go down to that time signature. And this song is an example of that. This one was a grower for me. I did think like something's a bit different here, and looking it up, I thought, okay, that explains a lot. It's in a different signature. There's a lot going on. And Chris Cornell was not a formally trained musician by any means. He had his own way of doing things. And I don't think this is the best example of his own way of doing things. It's not bad. It doesn't quite have the punch of the opener for me, and I really don't think it gets fully going until the outro for me, actually. That's easily the best part of this song.
The outro is wild, man. It's a beautiful look into the different kind of sound that they're achieving on this album. When I was talking before about this psychedelic meets super heavy, the outro is a really, if not the best example of this new sound. But this one, and this is more back then, but something that's always stuck with me. This one, even though it was super different sounding, it felt natural to me. And even though it was super heavy, this one was always like this, it's wild to say, but like this happy thought here. Because rather than it being this negative, like, get off my wave, it was more of that what I was talking about earlier. It was like, man, it's getting old with this sad shit and everybody being sad. And Cornell's saying that throughout this whole thing, like, get away from me, cry if you need to cry, if it clears your eyes, that's fine, but that's not for me. That's not for my wave. It's something that always stuck with me. Also, Ben Shepherd murders it bass line on this one all the way through. So many little intricate runs here that really keep me coming back. This is one that always screams to me as up there for this album. I dig this one. I disagree with you in the sense, or I'm on the other side on the sense of it not being one of the better ones here, but I can understand where you're coming from on a Cornell sense.
I mean, I am in the minority. This was the album's fourth single, and there were a lot of songs to choose from, so the single choice really did mean something. And it did pretty well. It made it to 11 on the mainstream rock charts in the US. None of these songs actually charted on the Hot 100 because of the rules back then. And it did all right in Canada and Australia too. Kind of late in the cycle for a big impact, but well,
yeah,
there are exceptions to that rule too.
No, I feel you. This one I remember getting more play on our local rock station than some of the one of the other singles. But I was always happy when this one came on the radio.
Yeah, I'm sure it was nice, but another one you definitely would have heard was the next song, which was the fifth single, which is, it's weird they waited this long to make this one a single, considering what a signature song it is for this band. Fell on Black Days. This song takes on depression, and as Chris Cornell described it, realizing you're unhappy in the extreme. And even though this was the fifth single, huge impact. It made it to number 4 on the rock charts and 54 on the general airplay charts. An even bigger impact in Europe, 24 in the UK and the top 20 in Finland and Ireland. And I completely agree. I love this song. I find this song very relatable. There are times when, you feel like everything's going great, but really you're unhappy as anything, even if it seems like everything's on the up and up, on the outside. Yeah, and the song rocks too. It does what it needs to do as a rocker, and it's just got that very real point, and I don't feel like the misery is being beaten over my head as it might be on another grunge album, which I appreciate it because I like to think of myself as a realistic person, maybe a bit cynical, but I do try to stay happy. A lot of people see me as this happy-go-lucky kind of person, but yeah, I fall on Black Days too. So I really got where he was coming from with this song, and I love this song. Really connect with it, and this is a classic for me.
Yeah, this and even from my notes at a critical standpoint, but I always felt this way. This at number 3, we get a view into a very accessible Soundgarden, and I think that's important for the pacing of this album. Something that even in its 6/4 time signature, where like Kim Thale saying that they didn't set the time signatures, this one for me is one that 6/4 is crazy, and you don't even feel it. It's weird to say, but like the weird musical feeling, you don't feel it here, even though it's sitting in this 6/4. And I love that about this song. Man, it just builds. This is such a great song, and it's always been one of my top Soundgarden jams. This is the poem, by the way. With every once in a while, of course I didn't do the whole entire repeating of the refrain and all, but I took my different ways with it. But this was the one I turned in. I was having the conversation with my wife today. I was like, can you imagine being my teacher and reading this poem coming in from an 8th grader? So it's either I have so many mixed feelings about it because I had some really cool eighth grade teachers. And I wonder if they were like, whatever, we're this far in the eighth grade and we know this is Fell on Black Days and we're not going to bust his chops. He's already in the principal's office enough. There's three. Or the number two is they read it and they were like, holy crap, what's going on? We might need to get somebody involved here. Or they didn't read it at all. I know I didn't get a bad grade on it because I would have gotten in trouble if I did, but I don't remember it being like 100 and them being like, read this in front of the class. So who knows? Who knows what truly went down? But this was, yes, this was a last minute. I don't have a poem for school today. And they're like, I'm just going to do Fell on Black Days. Straight. I remember, this is why I know I had the CD by this point, because I remember opening up the CD booklet and writing it almost word for word on the page. So yeah, this was the one.
I knew it. This was the one, I guess. I'm like, this is the poem. I knew
But like,
it.
man, it made it past an eighth grade teacher, and I didn't get like social services called.
Yeah, really.
So a wild old thought there. Thank you, pre-internet plagiarism, not getting caught. Who knows? The world may never know.
Yeah, I actually wrote poems for my assignments. Like, what?
I usually did, but maybe I had a little bit of eighth grade itis here. I was on my way. I knew I was good. I think I was already accepted to my high school at this point. Miss Jones will only be the one who ever knows. I would love to see her and ask her if she remembers, but that's also thinking a lot of myself there.
I'm just kicking myself. I could have done this in 7th grade instead of writing Lady Gaga Lost in the Woods.
You gotta
that was a
commit.
thing that doesn't reflect how I feel today. Oh boy. But,
yeah, man.
However, at least you did pick Fell on Black Days for your poem and not the next song, which is...
I don't think there's any other song on here that I could have written on paper that wouldn't have got me immediately taken to a social worker. So
yeah, that's yeah, that was the lightest choice of them, because definitely not this next one, which is Mailman. Music composed by Matt Cameron, the band's drummer, and now the drummer of Pearl Jam. And this song is about a man killing his boss. That's Chris Cornell said that it really illustrated the powerlessness we all feel at some point. Which I get. It's definitely a revenge fantasy, which can be a really effective song trope. I do tend to like those kind of songs, but honestly, maybe because this is such a 90s album, when I hear this song, I pictured Newman from Seinfeld, because that was a mailman capable of murder right there.
I heard that. Also, and I might be a tad off on the actual years, but right around here was when going postal became a thing. I don't even know if you know what I'm talking about, but back in the day, a bunch of, to put this long story short, a bunch of mail workers, postal workers went nuts and like raged inside of work, hurting a lot of people, and it became this whole a meme before memes of going postal, almost like Falling Down. Who is the actor? Kurt Russell. No, not Kurt Russell. Michael Douglas in Falling Down. I'm not sure if you're familiar. Anyway, people losing their minds. So that's, for me, that's where he was always coming from, was this going postal mindset here. But now I'm aging myself.
Yeah. I mean, these days, going postal is Kendrick and Drake.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
I'm Team Kendrick, by the way.
I don't know enough. I actually tried to look into it, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm it's all good.
I love it. I think it's hilarious.
Hopefully for these guys, it don't end up on some Tupac Biggie shit, So.
No,
but yeah,
I don't see that happening. But Kendrick, you're killing it, man. Keep it going. Keep it going.
Wildness.
But yes, I have to go back to 1994 now instead of talking about Kendrick and Drake. And back to Mailman. I do like the idea of this song. Great vocals. Execution's not my favorite. I think this song just, I wouldn't say it stays in the exact same sonic place, but it stays in the same sonic zone for me for too long. And on that level, I'm just not connecting with it.
Yeah, back then it was a skip song for me when I was younger. It was never my fave. I always thought it was a little too simple musically for me from them. Coming back to it in a critical look, I enjoy it much more, but I feel it's still a simple outing musically. Lyrically, for me, there's much more to connect to or connect with here as someone who's gone a little, through life a little bit more. But it's still a very simple outing and tends to be, as crazy as it sounds, as much as I love these guys, tends to be the skipper for me on this one.
Well, you know what the good news of that is? It means you've never wanted to kill your boss.
I don't know if I can say that, but I will say I've skipped this song a lot.
Okay, I guess I'm going too far into the super unknown, which is our next song, track 5. Yeah, it's about being alive in the super unknown, which, what a great album title and cover. I love that it's just this distorted image of the band and the black hole sun just sums all this up so well. And this is a great title track. It's a pretty straight ahead rocker, which I appreciate after Mailman, which is kind of real drudgy sounding a bit, because kind of slow, doesn't really rock out like that. I just feel like they're in their zone here. They're just doing what they do well, not trying to show off too much, but doing what they do well. And it's a simple lyric, but a very meaningful one, because you know what? We are all alive in the super unknown, because I don't know what the hell's going on. So
Yeah,
that's
it's real.
yeah, I'm glad to have this. We needed something a bit punchier at this point in the album, and I think this was a really good spot for this song, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, as far as pacing, Mailman doesn't take me out, but it definitely aids for Super Unknown to shine a little bit more here. I've always loved this intro riff, and I love the way it sets off into this nonstop run musically. It's really, the riff becomes the anchor for the whole entire song over the drums and bass, which we don't necessarily get a lot on this album. So it speaks dividends musically here. I've always had a little bit of an Aerosmith vibe with Super Unknown. It has always taken me to a little bit of an Aerosmith place. Not that I dislike that. I just wanted to add that in there anecdotally. But again, at this 324 breakdown, we get another foray into this psychedelic place, and then right back into this rock, to this heavier sound. And I love that about them. Super Unknown is one of, if it's up there as far as a full realized thought. Not that there aren't many that aren't here, but this one always felt rounded. It always, I'll go out on a limb here and say I always found it pop accessible as far as like top 40 radio could listen to it, and not be put off by it. It wasn't too Soundgarden for the masses. So I've always dug this one. I think it's placed perfectly on this album.
Yeah. Too bad it wasn't a single, even though it's so ready for that.
It's so crazy. Like, and I look back and I listened to it so much that it's hard to differentiate what was on the rock radio back then. I feel like I remember this being on the radio, but it was so crazy to see that it wasn't a single, because for me, this is so single worthy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do like that you mentioned that it's, to be clear, classic Aerosmith, not Get a Grip era Aerosmith, which is where we were at this point in time with that band. But I think that would have been a good sound to have on Top 40 in 1994. I think that would have been great, but it wasn't the most representative of the band. I think like a Fell on Black Days is definitely more
agreeable.
It's a more accurate depiction of who Soundgarden actually are.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, but We're about to actually get into the trippiest song on this album so far, which is Head Down. This was written by Ben Shepherd, one of two songs that he wrote, and it's been described as a take on bullying from both perspectives. And Pitchfork described it as psych folk, which I think is a perfect description.
Hell yeah.
Those are the words. And I like that combination. I think that's a very Beatles-esque combination. This one is a grower, though. It's a bit different for this point. It was a grower for me. I do like it. I do think it should have ended about 90 seconds sooner than it does. It is a 6-minute long song, and I don't think the ends quite justify the means in terms of length here.
I'm on the other side only because this one here is some of my most loved music from them, and only because, or mostly because, it's so beautifully structured and well written. Like, all the parts are fully functioning and they're so on point in the intro that when we get to this full grunge era downstroke feel, it feels natural, but it feels negative in the sense of this bullying sense, and I've always loved that. And then we go back to the real intricate opening intro riff on our way out. It is a longer song, but for me this one doesn't hit any empty spots. I've always really loved this one.
Okay, two sides of the same coin there. Two sides of the same coin. And now we're at track 7. The one everybody knows, whether you heard the whole album or not. Black Hole Sun. This song was actually simply inspired by Chris Cornell hearing a news anchor use the phrase Black Hole Sun. He wrote this song in 15 minutes, which is mind-blowing. And he did a demo of this on a magic tape of sorts that also included Fell on Black Days. That was really the breakthrough in the recording of this album, and he actually didn't think the band would like the song very much. But of course they loved the song. Matt Cameron even said in an interview he will always remember the first time he heard it and how he had goosebumps, because it was such a life-changing breakthrough moment for this band. And it's a heavy song, but it's also a very melodic and pretty song. And several people have noticed that this song's gotten some covers you wouldn't quite expect, because it's become so well known. And Cornell actually listened to Frank Sinatra before recording this at the producer's suggestion, so it could influence his vocals. And he worked really hard to get that perfect take, and of course it paid off because everybody knows this song. It was actually the 3rd single, which is very strange in hindsight, but it topped the rock charts, 24 on US airplay, and it was a worldwide hit. It was certified gold in 5 different countries, and it's the band's signature song. There really isn't it's hard to honestly, this is one of those songs that for me it's just kind of really difficult to critique because it's so ubiquitous at this point. It's a classic, but it's always been around. It's one of those songs I can't even remember the first time I heard it because it's just always kind of been around.
Yeah, it definitely has made the long trek as far as popular music. It definitely is timeless. I have a crazy love-hate affair with this song. I love this song. I love the poetry of this song. Kim's riffs here are pure minor key magic and something that I had never really heard before sonically as far as the way he presents this song. I understand the goosebumps because it was a mind-blowing song when I first heard it, and it is still a great song. I'm not going to take anything away from the song. I'm just going to give a little bit of anecdotal sprinklings here. This song became flat to me because of oversaturation, and this very rarely happens to me musically, but this one I don't know if it was the age I was, and I was never an elitist as far as music went. I was always a sharer, still to this day. Always, I love to share music with people. But this one just became like everybody singing Black Hole Sun, and for some reason that stuck with me wrong. This was their giant one, and mostly, I won't say mostly, but a lot of that came from the music video for this and how much MTV played this music video nonstop. And this music video, if you've never seen it, it's a wild take, over exaggerated take on some Atomic Family kind of vibes, but it always made me sick to the stomach. And I know it was supposed to. It like even over like Heart-Shaped Box, as far as videos go, it just freaked me out. It freaked me out. But anyway, long story short, it really got overplayed for me, and that's the only reason I don't go visit it as much as I used to. But yeah, I love this song. It is a beautiful, and it's so hard to play. It's so hard to play. But it's just the way Kim sets it up. It's part of his genius. So yeah, Black Hole Sun will live forever. Thank you for letting me rant. I don't know if I've ever told that story to anyone.
I mean, it is accurate because I wasn't around for this era. I didn't see the video on MTV, but this song hasn't gone away. I mean, just in this Baltimore area, I heard this song so many times on 1027 Jack FM.
Yeah.
Like this and Smells Like Teen Spirit were their go-to grunge songs. And this didn't ever hit for me the way Smells Like Teen Spirit did, but that's not a fair comparison necessarily. That's its
Agreed.
own separate entity. But yeah, it is a great song. There's a reason that it's endured. And its video was really iconic for many people. It did win the VMA for Best Hard Rock Video, and it did win a Best Hard Rock Performance Grammy. It's one of the 500 greatest songs of all time for Rolling Stone, but I talk about this oversaturation, and this is definitely a hot tea take I'm about to share. Ann Wilson of Heart has covered this song several times. And her tribute performance of it that I saw after Chris Cornell passed away, I think she outdid him. But maybe it's just because this song has been overplayed so much that I thought that. But also, I just love Heart too. That's not an objective take by any means. I love anything Ann Wilson sings.
That's why I don't think I've ever heard that one. Do you think you'll see it when you see him this week?
No, I am seeing Heart this week, but it's not on their set list. But she did record a studio version of it too. She did a whole album of covers from deceased artists, and this song was on it. And some of the songs she picked were not the biggest hits from the artist. Like the Tom Petty song she picked was Luna from his first album, not a hit. So it was an interesting mix of tunes. I do have the CD. It's called Immortal. I would definitely check it out if you like Ann Wilson at all, because she can sing anything to this day. One of the best rock vocalists ever. I can't wait to see her again. But she did Chris Cornell proud. They were friends. He used her studio, and they actually did record a song together on a Heart album, but it ended up not getting released due to label issues, and the song ended up being recorded with Lane Staley of Alice in Chains instead.
Huh, that's wild. I mean,
which is
both
cool.
Great voices. Yeah,
both great voices, but it would have been amazing to hear Chris and Ann Wilson do a duet together.
Oh yeah.
I hope that we do hear their duet one day for sure.
And Immortal just went into my Spotify because I don't think I've ever heard that album, and I'm very curious about that.
It's a neat little album for sure. We still have to do Heart on this show, though.
Heard that.
We still haven't done Heart. One day. That's priority for this year. But after the Black Hole Sun, we are going to go to a bit of a lighter note with Spoon Man, which is inspired by a real person. It is a street artist named Artist the Spoon Man who played music with spoons. And This song was first composed for the movie Singles in 1992. It was not included on the initial soundtrack, but the band was, along with Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. And it's a pretty quintessential grunge album, actually, the Singles soundtrack. But the song was featured in the movie. However, this band, Soundgarden knew they had to record the song. They knew they had to do it. So they actually got artist the Spoon Man to play his spoons on the song's bridge. Matt Cameron played pots and pans for the percussion piece, and it's a really cool song. This is a unique tune. This was not like other stuff, I can tell that. And it rocked hard. This was the lead single, and it told a story about a man just being misunderstood and resonated with a lot of people. They actually first debuted this song on tour with Neil Young, godfather of grunge himself, in 1993. But that was an appropriate thing. It made it to number 3 on the mainstream rock charts, and it won the Best Metal Performance Grammy. And I think that's all very well deserved. This is a really unique song, and it was a smart lead single choice, even if it's not the band's signature song. I really dig this one.
It's a great one. It always almost felt like a guilty pleasure for me because I used to play this one a lot. And even playing this riff, it felt a little too easy for the level that they operate, especially on this album. But I've always loved this song. And there's something about it, whether it comes from the raw feelings of Cornell just singing about this street artist named Artist, that people judge differently because of him being a street artist, or whether it comes, and really for me it comes from Artist really being on this track and crushing it. I mean, even on the video, doing his thing and getting down. It's always been one of my faves. If not only a guilty pleasure, one of my faves. It is very, I'm glad you said that. It's very unique. And it fits here on the album. It doesn't take you out, but it gives you this wild offbeat feeling here, that is a breath of fresh air, in the sense of it's just a happy-go-lucky song, really.
That it is. But we're not going to stay too happy-go-lucky with the next track, which is Limo Wreck. And the music for this was written by both Matt Cameron and Kim Thayil, so all the minds coming together with this song. And it was actually inspired by a trip down the LA freeway and the mix of luxury cars and beat down trucks, which that's an area where you would see that. You see that variety. Chris Cornell called it a shame on decadence song. And that's a real grunge concept for sure. I think this album really gets the grunge categorization more so for the lyrical content than its actual sound, because of a song like this specifically. And this song has a really tough task. It followed the 1-2 punch of the two most popular songs on the album. The two hits, they were decided pretty early on that they would be hits. But it works really well. I really like the idea, and it's another longer track. It's close to 6 minutes, but it doesn't slog. It keeps going and even builds a little bit. This is the song. This is what I want in a good rock song. I want to hear a song that I can picture myself enjoying in a live setting and jamming out to, and this is that song for me. And tough spot for it to be in, but it held its own.
Definitely a tough spot to be in, coming off of Spoon Man and Black Hole Sun. I can't tell you how much I love Cornell almost going Ronnie James Dio in the final piece of this song. It's one of my favorite pieces of this song, but I have to be on the other side with Limo Wreck, and I have been for a long time, but more so critically going back. There's a lot going on here, and for me in the long format, it's a bit jumbled. There is a build, but it just, for me, never seems to get off its feet to where I think it should. Long story short, a lot going on here for how long they did it, and this one is the one for me that just sticks around a tad bit too long. definitely, even back in the day, but even coming through this critical look at it, not my favorite on the album. Not a terrible song by any right, but this one just never stuck for me.
I mean, I will
And
say,
maybe it might be the positioning too. I've never factored that in until hearing you say that, but it comes off such a high point, and it's such a hard, crazy song. It just, for me, it ends up jumbled there.
I mean, it wasn't love at first listen for this song. It did take a couple more listens for me to really appreciate it.
If I'm correct, like hardcore Soundgarden heads would tell you that this is one of the best songs on the album. If I remember correctly, I feel like this has a cult following. Its stream numbers definitely do not show that, but I feel like it. If I remember correctly, it was a beloved song in the Soundgarden community.
I mean, the stream numbers are so weird because Black Hole Sun just black holes, it swallows them all up stream-wise.
I know.
It's insane.
I know.
But that's what happens sometimes, I guess. Because
the power of MTV and an awesome song. It'll get you every time.
Yeah, the power of MTV actually didn't help quite as much with the next track, which was a single. I was kind of surprised to learn this was a single.
Yeah.
The Day I Tried to Live. Chris Cornell described this as a song about trying to step out of being patterned and closed off and reclusive. Another concept I relate to greatly. Because, it can be hard to sometimes, go out when your heart's not in it, to go out into the public. Sometimes you just want to shut yourself off from the world, but you got to tell yourself, well, no, I need to try to live. So this song really speaks to me on that level. And also, this is my favorite Chris Cornell vocal on the whole album.
Yeah.
I love every bit of it. Even if it's not the most musically interesting, the vocal is enough for me to overlook any of that. Because you can tell he really believes what he is singing here. And this was the second single. This is a strange single choice. I don't think of it as that kind of song. Even for a grunge song, I just don't see it resonating with everybody, at least in a radio sense. And it did okay. It made it to 13 on the rock charts, but it did not get as much promotion as either Spoonman or Black Hole Sun. So it hasn't had the same kind of impact, which is understandable. It's not quite as dynamic musically as either of those songs, but it is a great song. It's definitely one of the high points of this album, and I do think everybody should listen to it.
This is a song that will live in my head forever. I'm totally with you. There's so much to connect to here. The way Cornell presents it to us is so natural, and you can feel it. I'm so glad you touched on that, because it really comes across in his presentation here. For me, musically, breaking this down, even back then, but now so much more being through life and breaking it down musically, it is really well done. This bass line, I love it, and the way the bass line guides this like narrative of the ho-humness staying away just by its almost chromatic downfall, so to speak, the boom 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 boom, and it lives throughout this song while the song is quote unquote sad, but then it breaks and you really get this, it leaves and we get this triumphant chorus that really sings across. This is such a well put together song. The quote unquote empty spots in this song they just end up singing so much more because the back and forth with this riff. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. I love this song so much.
I'm glad you do. It's a new favorite of mine too, because I hadn't heard this album before this week, and this is definitely one of my favorites I've learned recently.
Yeah, man, it's a jammer.
Yes, but it is a lot of a song, so we are going to switch things up a bit with the next track, which is Kickstand, a short track written by Kim Thayil. He came up with the title and Chris Cornell came up with some lyrics. It's definitely the most punk song here. That's the whole vibe it's going. It's short and sweet. And I like that we have this burst of energy. I think it's necessary after we've taken on some heavy ideas lyrically, especially in the previous two songs. It's a good interlude. I do feel like it's more of an interlude than a full thought out song, but it's a necessary interlude and it's bringing us into our home stretch. We're getting close to the end here and we're not done. We've got some more big stuff to cover and this is a great palate cleanser of sorts for all that.
It really is. It's a crazy little thought inside of 2 minutes. And it runs heavy, it gets put away wet, is the way I like to think about this one. It isn't like one of these weird short songs that take us out of the album. It just pumps us up, just like you said. It's a quick pump up and get back into it because we just came off a really meaty second act, so to speak, or second third of this album, and it adds some really heavy tones. So we get this beautiful little thought and we just get catapulted into the end third of the album.
Yes, and we're gonna go a bit more into this act with track 12, which is Fresh Tendrils, which is a slang term for a new bag of weed. So based on that, I think you can tell there's not a whole lot going on here lyrically in comparison to the rest of the album. And there's not. This is just, there's a lot of vague grunge platitudes that you hear in this song. However, it's a solid rocker. I don't think it is one of those songs it's not one of those songs that's meant to make a big statement. That's not what they're going for. And it does what it needs to do. It's not a highlight, but I'm not going to hate on it because I'm going to be seeing Matt Cameron in like less than 2 weeks live with Pearl Jam, and I don't want him to come for me. I feel like he'll see me out there and be like, you didn't like Fresh Tendrils.
I don't know if we'll feel like that. I always felt like this one was just not so much just there because I really love the opening riff on this. There's powerful riffs and powerful vocals. Maybe not lyrics, but powerful vocals. For me, this one has always sat up there in this sort of repetitive structure. It is a rocker, but it's like it just doesn't move the way I expect it to. And even with the time changes in here, it almost, I'm using the almost really big here, but almost falls a little bit flat. It's just a solid rocker. You're right. We say these things every once in a while, but it does its job. It doesn't scream hit. It doesn't scream timeless. It doesn't scream anything really so much as it just gives us a nice little rock here. So yeah, I'm not going to talk crap on it, but it's there. It's not a bad song at all, but it's not a great song in any right.
They wanted to fill out the CD. It's what
I tried so hard not to use the words filler throughout that whole thing, but it might be as close as it is as close to filler as I think we're gonna get on this album.
Yes, please, Matt Cameron, don't hate me. Please don't. But we are going to get heavier with the next track, which is 4th of July, which was inspired by an acid trip that Chris Cornell had on a Native American reservation on the 4th of July. But it sounds much heavier than that, so this song's been pretty misinterpreted because of that. Because, yeah, Chris Cornell sings this as if it's an apocalypse anthem. But I love that dichotomy, actually. That really made me appreciate the song more. This is the most... If there's any song on which Chris Cornell is channeling Eddie Vedder, it's this song. This is the one. The vocals remind me so much of Pearl Jam. And it was not an easy song to record, actually. Kim Thayil stormed out of the studio while recording this track because he had to work for 3 days to do his guitar part because They were just pushing him. But the results were worth it. This is a great song.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great heavy song here. When you get the story and you look back on it, it takes on so much more weight. For me, this is as grungy. And I'm glad you said, he's channeling Eddie Vedder here, but this is the most grungy in a stereotypical genre sense as they get from me on this album. And that's okay with me. It's not necessarily like a lot of stuff on this album, but it's a good song and it's well done. You can hear why Theo had to do 3 days, especially if they were pushing perfection on this, because there's a lot of work for him on this song. This is one, it's put perfectly where it is. It's for our subconscious listener, it really gives us a slap in the face. Kickstand gave us a little boot to the butt, but 4th of July for me gives us a slap in the face, gives us a heavy wake up, and lets us know that we're on the way out of this album.
Yes, and we're now at the penultimate track, number 14, which is called Half, the second song written by Ben Shepherd, and the only song that Chris Cornell does not sing on because he didn't think he could outdo what Ben Shepherd did. And this is a really short Indian influence piece. It's a little more than 2 minutes long. Again, more of an interlude than an actual song, but it's a very cool interlude. And again, we just came out of this heavy song, and spoiler alert, we're going to go into another heavy song. So there was a lot for them to, it would have been a lot sequencing wise with 2 super heavy tunes in a row. So I think this was a smart place to put this neat little interlude.
Yeah, and in the penultimate setting here, it's perfect. I love this jam for so many different reasons. The Zeppelin lover in me immediately it screams Kashmir to me, and its sound and feeling. The Middle Eastern Indian vibes are coming straight out of Kim, straight out of his heritage, and I love that. And they're mesmerizing. They really are. I spent so much time just listening to this track back in the day because it was just a cool contrast to everything else that was going on, and it really sang to me. But where I didn't want to use palate cleanser for Kickstand because it was more of this catapult, this is really a neat way to do a wild palate cleanser before our finale. And I think I'm right with you where it's placed perfectly on this album. I couldn't think of a better spot for this jam here.
Yes, and now we've reached the end of this wild ride with track 15, Like Suicide. This song was actually inspired by a bird flying into Chris Cornell's door window, and this robin, that was the bird, it was really suffering. So Chris Cornell didn't want to see that and threw a cinder block on the robin so it could be out of its misery. I wonder if the writers of Everybody Loves Raymond were fans of Soundgarden because they had an episode built around whether or not it was humane to kill a bird in misery. This was a whole Thanksgiving episode of that show.
Maybe so.
Maybe so. Maybe Chris Cornell called Ray Romano up and said, "Hey, Ray, here's an idea." It was a good episode. It was definitely one of the best later episodes of that show, for sure. But what's crazy about this song is this song sounds like he's singing about a person in the metaphorical sense of their flying. And I just love Chris Cornell's mind. I've loved learning about how he was writing these songs. It's so cool. And he's just upfront about it. It's not, he's just going to tell you how it is, which I really appreciate. And I just love the way that the percussion and the guitars mix on this song. And this is a true epic album closer in the Led Zeppelin scheme of things for me. Coming in at 7 minutes, none of it wasted. just a perfect ending to the album. And even though it wasn't a single, it's a really beloved track. It's even been called the best Soundgarden track of all.
Well, that's wild. That's wild. It is a beautiful song, a beautiful 7 minutes to leave us on this album. And I always loved it. It showcases the way a finale should showcase, in my opinion. It gives everybody their time, and it flows. In hindsight, in this critical sense, going through it and knowing what Chris Cornell became, what Soundgarden became musically, or evolved into musically later on, even on Down on the Upside, this song does exactly what we look for in an album closer a lot of the time. And that gives us a look into the future of this band, a sound that we really hear later more on Down on the Upside, or even in later Cornell works, is really present here and back in 94. It's pure Soundgarden, and it's 7 minutes of it, and it holds its own through these 7 minutes. Another one that I love for closers is it's one of those closers that immediately make me want to flip it back over and start it up again. Maybe that's the Soundgarden lover in me, but this one always ends. I like how you said the epic Zeppelin ending here. It really is an epic finale on this really well put together album.
Yeah. And weirdly enough, I don't feel too sad listening to it, even if it sadly became a bit prophetic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Shit, I didn't even think about that. That's pretty wild. Yeah, no, I feel the same way. Having not really thought about it like that, but it doesn't hit like the title would lead you to believe.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And we're at the end of this. That's wild. This has been quite a journey into the super unknown we've taken.
Quite a journey. I'm so glad we got to do this one.
Yeah, so am I. I really enjoyed digging into this band that I really didn't know very much about until this week. And it's it's a formative piece for you, clearly, as far as academia and music.
Right. I feel like there's a bunch on this album now that me and you can play on the jukebox, because there's so much good stuff here that the whole bar will just go nuts on anyway. But it's good stuff to listen to, you know?
Yeah, most definitely. I think I know the answer. What's your grade for the album?
Soundgarden Superunknown. This is one of the harder ones for me because there's so much nostalgia wrapped up into every feeling that I have on this album. And it was a challenge in the critical sense of going back and taking it piece by piece and really putting a critical ear onto. But it still shines the way I remember it shining, from the kinetic heavy opener of Let Me Down all the way to Just Like Suicide. In my opinion, we only falter one, maybe two times throughout this whole album, and they're trips at the best, not necessarily falls. We get a beautiful sound that still resonates to this day, in its production, in its musicality, and something that back then was groundbreaking with sonically and the way it was presented to us. I wholeheartedly give this an A, and I further my beef with Rolling Stones because they only gave it 4 stars. As I get into these later years and look at the Rolling Stone ratings, we're not as close friends as I thought we used to be.
Well, especially lately with all the instant classics they've
oh
been
yeah
getting out.
Oh yeah.
Well, you did agree with the one instant classic.
Yeah, they get it right every once in a while, it looks like, but
to be a music fan is to have a love-hate relationship with Rolling Stone. When they're on point, they're on point, but when they're wrong, they're wrong.
I'm with you. How about you? What do you feel about this one?
Yeah, it was at times a bit of an acquired taste for me. I did come in only knowing the big radio hit that everybody knows, but looking into it definitely enhanced my appreciation of what was being done here. And it's so consistent. This really is a well-sequenced album, and there really isn't filler. There's songs that I don't connect with as much as others, but I can't think of really anything that's complete filler. And on that note, I have to give this I'm going to give it a B+, critically speaking. I feel like I have to, because I think there's a variety of sounds here. I think there's something anybody can enjoy on this album. And it's a winner for me. It's a winner.
Yeah, and as you dive into this, Cornell, or everybody listening, as you dive into the Soundgarden with us, or really enjoy anything coming out of this, I implore you to take that on to Audioslave as well, because the work Chris Cornell did with Audioslave was, in my opinion, some of the best stuff we get these days. So another one maybe we'll end up doing down the road, but definitely a listen for anybody that really enjoyed what was going on here on Super Unknown.
Yeah, it's crazy because actually, this is crazy. The first time I ever heard the name Chris Cornell was when I was 11 years old, and it was because of an American Idol contestant, David Cook. He ended up winning the show this year. He performed Billie Jean on American Idol and got praised for how original he was. And he ended up admitting, oh, I did the Chris Cornell version of Billie Jean. And I was like, okay, I had no idea who Chris Cornell even was. And being 11, I was not diving into that. That was not where I was. But yeah, that's the first time I ever heard the name Chris Cornell. It was because of American Idol, and back then that show was inescapable, so it was the talk of the country, quite literally, that everybody was talking about, oh, he did the Chris Cornell version. There were definitely people wondering, who the hell is Chris Cornell watching American Idol? I was one of them, but now I know, and I'm glad I did. I knew before this, but I'm definitely glad I know a lot more now.
There you go. What's your favorite track on this album?
Fell on Black Days.
Yeah, I'm almost straight with you. Day I Tried to Live is my jam piece.
Oh, yeah.
I live through that song. There's not a time where that song comes on and I'm just not full rocking on it. I would, we talk a little bit before the podcast starts, and just to leave you guys with a little bit more anecdotal, my family had to listen to me try to sing Chris Cornell all week, which is a feat for anyone, especially someone who can't sing that well. So it was even though it was terrible, I feel like the Day I Tried to Live, I can always get some kind of Cornell outing there. It's my jam.
Yeah, I will not be attempting any of these songs at karaoke. I tried Pearl Jam's Jeremy a couple of times. It did not work. I think I gotta stick with some like Red Hot Chili Peppers. That's a bit more my speed.
There you go.
I think that's where I'm at in terms of 90s rock songs. That's what we gotta go with. But yeah, so I will be on vacation. It is relevant to those of you listening because I will be going to Las Vegas and seeing 2 concerts, and we'll be talking about both of them on this podcast. And the first of them, because it all ties together, the first of them I will be seeing is Pearl Jam on their Dark Matter World Tour. They have a new album out. It came out the same day as the Tortured Poets Department, and obviously there was a lot to discuss with that album, but we do want to dive into Dark Matter and see what's going on. It's gotten some great reviews so far, and I'm really curious to hear these new songs live, in addition to whatever they play. I haven't seen them before. So it'll be a really cool experience at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. And I can't wait to share it with all of you very soon. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be back at you before you know it.
Peace.